Right, welcome everybody to the Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland Police and Crime Panel meeting for Monday the 3rd of June 2019. Can I remind you all this meeting is being webcast live to the public. It's via the County Council's website. So for those not able to watch the webcast live, it will be available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. But so that people at home can hear you, can I remind members to switch their microphone on when speaking and to turn it off when they've finished speaking. So it's just the one button in the middle at the front there, if you've not used these systems. So on when you're speaking and off again when you've finished. We've had apologies for today's meeting from Councillor Michael Mullaney, who's representing Hinckley and Bosworth Borough Council, and also from Councillor Robert Ashman, who represents North West Leicestershire Council. We have got a couple of substitutes. So it might be an idea if we do introductions, so everybody knows who everybody is. Shall we start on my left here?
Joe Orson, leader of Melton Borough Council.
Michael Rickman, chair of CSP at Harborough and portfolio holder.
Deborah Taylor, chair of the CPS at Charnwood.
David Bill, representing Hinckley and Bosworth.
Alan Walters, chair of the CSP in Rutland.
Les Fenimore, Labour District Council.
Paul Heinson, chief executive of OPCC.
Willie Bark, Police and Crime Commissioner.
Kirk Master, Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner.
Meroni Salalani, independent member.
Sharman Rahman, Stonygate councillor.
Kevin Lloydell, chair of the CSP, Oby Wixton Borough Council.
Ivan Old, lead member for Children, Families and Safer Communities, Leicestershire County Council.
Elaine Pantling, Leicester City councillor.
Keith Culverwell, independent member.
Andrew Woodman, North West Leicestershire District Council.
Manjit Hossaini, councillor for Abbey Ward, Leicester.
Councillor Hemant Bhatia from Leicester City Council for Bomodley's Ward.
Thank you, everybody. So we have had a request to change the order of business for this afternoon, but we'll get on to that once we've got a chair for the meeting appointed. Sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Chair. I did ask that the order be changed, but actually Chief Constable has managed to get here for 2 o'clock, which is very good of him given his previous meeting. So I'm more than happy for the agenda myself to take place in order. It's a matter for the panel, of course. So I kind of take back that request.
So we'll continue with the set out agenda. So the first item is election of chairman for the Police and Crime Panel. Do we have any nominations for chairman?
I should like to propose Councillor Joe Orson.
Orson? Thank you.
Kevin Lloydell, Oby Wixton Borough Council.
Do we have any other nominations for chair of the Police and Crime Panel? Okay, so there's no other nominations for chair, so the motion is on the table. Does everybody agree? All in favour, raise your hand in the air. That looks unanimous. Mr. Joe Orson is appointed chairman of the Leicestershire and Rutland Police and Crime Panel for the 2019-20 year. Congratulations, and take your seat, Mr. Orson.
Right, well, thank you very much, everyone, for your continued support. I think I'm one of the few Police Crime Panel chairmen who's been here from the start now, 2012. We actually started sitting with David Morgan, I remember, who was the legal advisor. So I've seen 3 legal advisors, 3 democratic help clerks, and I've total change in panel now. Although David, wherever David is a substitute. You were on the first 2 years, weren't you, David, of the panel? So again, thank you for your support. Moving on to election of deputy chairman. Do I have any nominations, Deborah?
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to nominate Mr Ivan Old.
Do I have a seconder anywhere? David? Are there any other nominations? I'll put forward Michael Rickman, who served well the last 12 months. Is there a second for Michael? Kevin? Thank you very much, members. Obviously, that will go to a ballot. I'm not sure whether this is a secret ballot or hands-up ballot. Is there any rules on this, Ewan?
Yes, we've looked into the rules this morning, and there's no provision for a secret ballot, so it will have to be a show of hands.
Okay. Right, members, you have two candidates before you. I'll take them in order of proposal, shall we say. Those who vote for Ivan, raise their hands, please. 1, 2, 3. Those who vote for Michael, please raise their hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 3, 6, 3, 7, 3. Okay. Thank you very much. Congratulations, Michael. Moving on to minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of March, paragraphs 3 to 8. As you know, members have been with me. I do go through correctness on each page. This is your opportunity to say how incorrect they are or how correct they are. But anything on page 3 to raise? 4, 5, 6, 7. Thanks very much, members. Public question time. I haven't been notified of any questions. No questions. We move on. I haven't been told of any urgent items either, which takes us on to declarations of interest. We do have standing declarations of interest for Mr Culverwell and Miss Lalani. I will ask you, actually, this is the first meeting of very much a new panel, just to tell us all what those interests are, just for the matter of record. Keith and Merenisa.
So I have 2 sons in the Leicestershire force and 1 in the Metropolitan Police Force.
Okay, I've just got a niece who's in the police cadets in the county.
Thank you very much. So that won't be raised again in the next 12 months at all. I will take the order as in the agenda, Lord Buck, if that's okay with you. So obviously item 7, the HMIC FRS report. Members, pages 9 to 60. I ask you to introduce the paper, please, Lord Buck.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Chair. Can I congratulate you and Councillor Rickman on being elected to the post of Chair and Vice Chair, and can I, from this side, as it were, of the House, welcome all the new members of the panel. I hope they find the panel as fascinating and as hard work as I do. They're all very welcome, and it's good to see others who've been on the panel before back too. And I think they all deserve congratulations for winning their elections, of course, now 4.5 weeks ago. I'm delighted that the Chief Constable is here today to talk to this paper. I believe those who were on the training course this morning will have been told in no uncertain terms that the role of the panel is not to hold the Chief Constable to account, but to hold me to account and my office to account. It's something the Chief Constable agrees with, I think, passionately. And I'm afraid it's true. It's me you hold to account. So if you don't mind, I'll briefly introduce this and then ask the Chief to say some words. So the headline message of this quite long document is that the Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland force is making progress despite complex challenges and a rapidly changing external environment. Her Majesty's Inspectorate's report examines performance in a number of key areas that feature high in the public consciousness, on the public radar. 1, how well do we investigate, or how well do the police investigate crime? 2, how well do the police do enough to protect vulnerable people? Thirdly, how well does the police meet the demand that faces it? And lastly, do the police behave ethically and lawfully? And obviously it gives me pleasure as Police and Crime Commissioners to tell the panel that the force has been rated good in every single area that was scrutinised by the inspectors on this occasion. And this reflects obviously well on the Chief Constable and his senior team. And it also gives a major boost, I think, to officer ranks and the staff, the dedicated police staff, and I include in obviously that PCSOs and specials who provide 24/7 support. I'd want to record my thanks in front of the panel for this good work at every level in our police force. I think they're doing a pretty good job under pretty difficult circumstances. So, a bit of context, and the Chief can talk more about this. A few facts. 999 calls are rising. Recorded crime is rising. And police numbers are only just beginning to grow meaningfully after many years of austerity. But of course, we're nowhere near the level that we were in 2010. Nonetheless, the force is rated good for its effectiveness, its efficiency, and its legitimacy. And what the report highlights, in short, are improved support for victims of crime, improved services for vulnerable people, and strong praise for the progress being made in the fight against cybercrime. Everyone on the panel knows that crime's changing, and policing has to change with changing crime. Visibility in the cyber world is just as important as visibility on the street corner. And we're seeing good progress in the street corner world as well, because of the Darwin Review that previous members of the panel will have heard so much about. There are, of course, areas for improvement. And there is still concern from HMI about the force's performance in recording crime. Again, something the panel has dealt with on many occasions. I want the panel to rest assured that improving that data integrity remains a regular topic of conversation between the Chief and I, and that both of us feel strongly that improvements will and must take place to what is already an improving position. Just a word about vulnerability. In the Police and Crime Plan that I hope new members have got copies of, vulnerability is one of the key themes. And the report shows, and I'm proud of this, that Leicestershire Police are good at protecting vulnerable people, and it has a strong culture and commitment to helping those in greatest need. And it is a clear priority for the force, and for me too, as it happens. You will have seen about the substantial investment in digital forensic technology, and the level of technical capability for this force is described as outstanding. So Leicestershire Police are active, very active, from processing and uploading indecent images discovered through investigations to national databases, and therefore that aids rapid identification of potential victims. And the Chief Constable team is second only to the Met, the Metropolitan Police, for the quality of work in this really important area. The plan emphasises the need for productive and viable partnerships with a full range of stakeholders, obviously including local authorities in a major role, but many other stakeholders too, from health to fire to probation and others too. The report observes that our force has well-established arrangements for working with other organisations to meet and hopefully, ideally, reduce demand. The new people zones are up and running in Loughborough, in New Parks and Colville, and this has attracted some positive comment from Her Majesty's Inspectorate, which sees the project as part of a long-term approach, feeling our way towards problem solving and helping people, at the same time trying to reduce that demand, a lot of the unnecessary demand sometimes, on the force and on our other public services. Every local authority member here will know that their local authority receives demand sometimes that isn't really for them and isn't really demand, but it has to be met. Police are absolutely no different. So, Chair, panel, that's what I just wanted to say in introducing this quite long document. We did think that it was an important document for us and for the people of Leicestershire, so we thought it was worth, although it's a long read, putting it on the agenda today. And with your permission, I'll ask the Chief to see if he has further comments.
Just before Simon starts, it's right and proper that we did have this before the panel today, so thank you for bringing it forward. But if you hadn't have volunteered it, we would have asked for it anyway. Yeah, but thank you. Simon.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I mean, I'm not sure I'm going to add lots to what the Police and Crime Commissioner has said. I mean, the first thing I'd want to do is acknowledge that the hard yards are done every day by officers, staff and volunteers. It's Volunteers Week this week. We shouldn't lose sight that we've had over 100,000 hours of volunteering contributed to the force in the last 12 months as well. For members of the panel, both new and old, you'll see that HMI has moved to an Ofsted grading. Those of you involved in the giddy world of education, you'll see some parallels with that. And the idea at the moment is legislation requires Her Majesty's Inspectorate to, in effect, certify that each force is fit for purpose on an annual basis. What that doesn't mean is we get an inspection of everything every year, and at 14 and 15, pages 14 and 15 at the start of the report, you can see there the areas that break down within the headlines, because of course Peel as the inspection is the best mnemonic ever in policing. So Peel as the founding father gets turned into police effectiveness, efficiency and legitimacy, and someone at the HMI's won the innovation prize for that, I'm sure. And what this breaks down then is into sections. When on page 14 it says that armed policing is ungraded, really that's a kind of operational necessity. We do get a report about armed policing that tells us the view of how we are. It says we're fine, but obviously if you were to publish that nationally who was and wasn't fine, it might change the behaviours of those who are less laudably motivated than perhaps those of us in this room. This is the first time we've ever got good for everything, which we're proud of, but we're not complacent about. And of course what it then means is instead of arguing about whether you should be required to improve something or good, you start arguing about, well, why aren't we outstanding for neighbourhood policing, for instance? And that's the discussion that we then have. HMI takes a risk-based approach. So what they have inspected afresh is areas that they felt we were less strong at. And you can see there, according to the dates, what they have looked at. And those of you who've been on the panel for a little while will remember, there were some recommendations in the past around some of these areas. I was only just going to make a couple of other points, if I might. The first is there's a process here of if something needs fixing, you get a recommendation. If there's something needs looking at, you get an area for improvement. There are no recommendations in this report at all. It's the first time I think we've ever had a report, certainly in my memory, where we haven't had recommendations of some sort. So yes, there are areas for improvement. And just to reassure the panel, we take those. We take all of the recommendations of the past, all the areas for improvement. We put them on one of those nice project plans that organisations have, and I'm held to account by the Police and Crime Commissioner about those on a fairly regular basis, and we update what we would call SAB, which is the Strategic Assurance Board, which is a meeting chaired by the PCC, at which myself and my senior team are held to account. So the areas for improvement in here, which predominantly are about talent spotting and people, are already on that chart. In the finest traditions of these things, we did challenge some of what was said about them, but we were not successful in our challenge, so we take that on the chin and move on. And it would be remiss of me, obviously, that the panel has some key roles. One of those will be about the budget. Within this, there is lots of stuff around how are we using the budget that we have. It concludes that we're using the budget that we have pretty well and pretty sensibly. But on page 35, it also puts the budget perhaps into some context. And one of the great dilemmas, particularly for those of you new to the panel, you will see play out as we go forwards towards the budget setting meeting, which I guess will be January, February time. I look at you and it's going to be that sort of time, isn't it? Is that police funding is quite a tricky thing. So different forces get different amounts from central government. Different forces have historically made different investment decisions through what were originally police authorities and then have become police and crime commissioners. So the spend per head of population does vary quite a bit across forces, and we are sort of just below the midway point on that. And for those of you particularly who are involved in other accountability mechanisms for other public services, you might store this in your does Leicestershire get its fair share kind of argument box that I think we've all got and we all have as part of the debate. So it's a report that we're quite proud of, but we're not complacent about because, of course, if you're the chief and you get a report like this, then you immediately start, having qualified for Europe, you want to win the title, or at the very least make sure you qualify for Europe next time. The likelihood is there will not be another inspection cycle till springtime of next year. I don't think I can be any more specific than that, so probably March, April of next year the next cycle of inspection will start. But in essence, in every sense of the word, it is a good report, it is a strong report, and that reflects the hard work of the men, women, officers, staff, volunteers of the organisation, because they've put the hard yards in for this, and I would want just to put on record my thanks to them.
Thanks very much, Simon. Thanks very much, Lord Bark. Just to remind members with experience know very well about strategic and operational. This is the sort of report where you can drift into operational. There's always a bit of a grey area. Try not to get into the grey area, then we may be able to hold it on a straight keel. I ask all members as well if they can keep their questions, try and make them as short as possible, really, because if we all ask a question on each paper and you all ask a supplementary, we're going to be here until 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. So if you can at least keep your questions short, that would be great. But I certainly don't want to stifle any debate or any questions. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to go to the paper, and I'm going to take you for any questions on pages 11, 12, 13, 14 and 15 and 16. It's just possible David might have a question on page 16. That's the letter from Zoe Billingham.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I often wonder, having been around here before, whether a public document such as this, in this case has been pretty helpful, though, whether this is really helpful to the the police force as a whole. Any criticism I find uncomfortable to read, and I know members of the force will feel the same. Some of the criticisms are kindly meant, no doubt, but they can have far-reaching consequences. Do you share my concerns about this, please?
I do, but I think you have to obviously balance it out with the fact that the police are obviously a public police force. Their accountability to the general public, and so they have to be ready, like I suppose some politicians have to be, so many others have to be ready to be criticised and to be able to answer criticism when it comes. I think in this instance we are remarkably free of criticism in this report, but there are places, as Simon has already said, where there's clear room for improvement, and I think it's right and proper that should be stated in the report in the way that it is, in a reasonable fashion. And the observations that the Inspector of Constabulary makes, who knows Leicestershire very well, Zoe Billingham has been, I think, our inspector for a long time, Simon, is that right? She's quite capable of criticising us a good deal more than this. Here, I think it's an excellent letter, and I'm very happy for this document to go to the general public, because I think it gives them an overall view of Leicestershire Police, which I think is deserved.
Okay, thank you, Lord Barker. I support everything you said there. Now, I'm going to take it in three sections. Again, for those of you who've worked with me for a long while, I normally take the black headline and just go through each paragraph. This report's just a little bit too long, so for that process. So I'm going to try it. It is in three sections. So I'm going to ask for questions from page 18 right through to page 33. If that doesn't work too well, if we find ourselves all over the place, we will revert back to taking each paragraph as it comes. So I'm asking for questions for page 18 through to 33. Deborah.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a couple. First one is on page 19, the bottom bullet point there, the proportion of crimes where victims did not support police action. Is that something that the panel should be concerned about? Is it the lack of action by the police, or that they didn't want the police to take any action? So just some clarity on that one. And my second point was on page 21, the fifth paragraph down, about the use of police bails dropped since changing the law in 2017. I probably just want to understand what the changes in the bail is really, and why we've dropped, and is that concerning as well? Thank you.
Great questions. I'll pass on to the Chief in a moment, but I can't resist either of them really. That really important figures at the bottom 19 is a kind of cross the police have to bear a large part of the time, which is that people who've clearly been victims of crime are not prepared, either at the start or further on in the inquiry, to support the prosecution, the potential prosecution. And of course that leads to, it is possible to get a conviction without, what's the expression, without a witness, but it's much more difficult. So cases that are clearly good cases disappear and don't get off the ground because the victim, for various reasons, and we know those reasons are often bad reasons, not good reasons, finds that they're not prepared to take it through. And that's really worrying, I think, as well. But Simon can say more about that. And as to the other question, I think a mistake the government made a few years ago was changing the position as regards bail in the way that it changed it. One of the worry for the government, as I understand it, was that sometimes bail went on forever, and the people would keep going back to the police station after 2 months or 28 days, and their case still wouldn't be ready, so they'd be bailed again and again and again. And that did happen in a number of cases, and it happened wrongly in quite a number of cases. But the remedy that the government used was to almost abolish bail altogether. So either someone was remanded in custody, which stays the same, or they were remanded under investigation, RUI, which meant that they sort of waited until they were required, as it were, to go back to the police station. They were warned in Parliament, and I don't do this often, but I was actually spoke while the committee stage of this bill was on in the Lords, to say that this was going to be not going to work out well. I've been advised by Simon and others that the police really didn't want this to happen. And I'm afraid the fears that a lot of people, of all political persuasions and none, thought this was going to be a mistake. And I think it's been a real problem for the police. Simon, do you want to agree or disagree?
In a purely operational sense, it was not the best thought out reform, in my view. If anyone wants to read an interesting report about it, the College of Policing's report on the consultation predicted all of the challenges that we now have, and it was accompanied by quite a strong steer that we shouldn't be using bail very much at all. That has meant that we have then missed opportunities to use bail. So, for instance, you can bail with conditions, and we should perhaps have been doing more of that, perhaps particularly around things like domestic abuse cases. But where it leaves us is a significant number of people released under investigation who no longer have time limits around them, whereas previously they would have had a bail date which would have had a time limit around it. So in effect, we've created a management process around that. Our trend is pretty typical nationally, and the tricky bit around it is particularly around forensics and digital, which can take quite a time to come back. So our trends are very similar to the national. We've done lots of stuff to try and manage and grip it, because in effect before, if you arrested somebody, they got bail. Bail might be a month away. And there were too many occasions where we and other forces were extending. But now you're just released under investigation and there isn't a date. So in effect, we've been setting our own dates and trying to manage around that. And I think one of the other issues with it was that to get bail and to get bail extended has been set at relatively high levels within the organisation nationally, which doesn't encourage you, if you're a constable, to do it. You know, the idea of getting a superintendent to extend. So, I mean, the only reassurance I can give you is that what the inspectorate found with us was pretty typical nationally, and that would be the same with the data on page 19 as well, where you can see with all of this, there's an England and Wales comparison. Our comparisons are pretty similar. In general terms, a number of the, you can see there, violence against the person, within that would be around domestic abuse, where the person who calls us wants us to do something there and then to make it stop. That isn't necessarily the same as them supporting us taking somebody to court with whom they may have, most likely have a relationship. You can see that similarly with sexual offences as well. And the other thing I would say is around people who are involved on the edge of criminality. And in terms of accountability to the Police and Crime Commissioner, I mean, you see the same briefings as I see about things that happen and who is and isn't supporting us progressing things. And, you know, it is not uncommon for us to have cases where people have been quite badly hurt, but they just don't want to cooperate with us. They don't want to tell us who the person is who did it, or they'll tell us who did it, but they won't support taking them through the justice process. So I think the usefulness of the data is, are we far off what other forces are experiencing? This is a bit of data that is relatively new in being counted. It wasn't counted till maybe 2 years ago, because it was part of the exploring why have levels of detections dropped away, and this is one of the reasons. So as Willie said, you can produce a victimless prosecution, but to do that, when we have a case from the weekend where we've done that, you need the evidence in the first call, the 999 call quite often. You need evidence off body-worn video. You need other evidence that corroborates that something's happened to somebody who's no longer prepared to tell you what's happened.
Just one very quick check. Is that something that you'll be looking into then? Because obviously these people are probably quite vulnerable people that don't want to support the police action. So, and that's part of your police and crime plan. So is that something that you will continually monitor?
Absolutely, and the police, absolutely, it's very, 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 very much so. And of course, the police go to enormous lengths to try and make victims feel comfortable and make the victim process as easy as possible in order, both for the victim's sake, but also to try and get justice done too.
Members, sorry, Lane and Ivan.
This is on page 28, and it's regarding the paragraph 4 and 5, and where it talks about the teams that deal with people with mental health and getting them back into society. My question really is about what measures are being put in place to prevent the vulnerable from being exploited by criminal activities such as drug dens, etc., you know, drug houses. That's it, thank you.
I'm going to go straight to Simon, if I may, on this one, because this is very much an important part of operational policing, what efforts are made here, which are considerable.
Yeah, I mean, candidly, there's also an issue here about the dangers of criminalising mental health as an issue and stigmatising it. And, you know, the guidance is that, in effect, if it's just a mental health issue, we shouldn't be going too near it. That being said, the triage car feels like something that we need at the moment, just so people can be clear what that means. There is a police officer partnered up with a mental health nurse. That means they have access to both sets of data around people, so particularly perhaps their health record. We try and do lots of stuff around vulnerable people. If some of you have had the misfortune of hearing me speak publicly, we refer more vulnerable people to other agencies on a typical day than we make arrests by quite a significant factor. So the kind of thing you're describing, I would see within the county lines work, the kind of cuckooing, putting pressure on people to behave, and vulnerability can be all sorts of things, can't it? It can be being young, it can be mental health. We do work a lot with partners, trying to make sure that they're aware as well, because the manifestations of the people who are being manipulated are it's almost more likely that your GP is going to get told than the cop is, in a way. So we do lots of that, and we do a lot of risk assessing around vulnerable people and trying to safeguard adults particularly, but young people also, to make sure that there is a wrap around them and some support for them. But that isn't always easy, and particularly if they're dealing with the people being pushed towards criminality, the pressure on them can outweigh their feeling that they need to tell somebody. But we try and do lots. There's lots of risk assessment, lots of trying to make people aware of, from other professions, taxi drivers, mental health nurses, GPs, local councillors in their surgeries, everybody, to say, look, this is the kind of pressures you might see manifest. So we're doing quite a lot.
Right, thank you very much.
Could I just come back on that very quickly? I want a couple of things. Kurt reminds me a mental health strategy is being drawn up, which is important, and we're holding, PCC, our office is holding a conference in October this year.
Yeah, I don't know the exact date, but
around mental health, and we'll obviously make sure people in the panel know, members of the panel know about it. The paragraph you mentioned was about the PAVE team. That is something I think the police can be proud of, and the PC and the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, because that is a practical way of trying to keep people, very vulnerable people who could easily move into the criminal world, is keeping close watch to make sure that their mental health position, the criminal work that they might be inclined towards, is looked after and protected before they commit crime. And my office provides quite a lot of the funding for that. And we've just continued the funding for another year. Sorry,
Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for your comments. I think it's really important that we see that the work you are doing, it is really good. But as a councillor, that in the area that I work in, we do see a lot of this, and so for me, it's very reassuring to know that you are doing this kind of work. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that comment. I mean, one of the real issues, I think Simon touched upon it, is the person who commits a criminal offence, who is as much victim as they are perpetrator, and what the system does with, including the police, what the system does with people like that, so that the future is better. But there are people in both positions at the same time, really.
Thank you. I have Ivan, Kevin, and then Les.
Thank you, Chair. On page 26 at the top, reference the proportion of investigations that end in a criminal prosecution or some action taken against the offender, known as positive outcomes, has not increased in line with the overall crime trend. How worried should we be by that statement?
Well, we certainly shouldn't be pleased by it, so we ought to be worried by it. It's true. I mean, the reasons for it, Simon may be able to talk about more dispassionately than I, but it is something to do with the lack of resource, and you as a county council know all about lack of resources. Other councillors around the table know too. But lack of resource makes it more difficult, not easier, to get positive outcomes from cases. Positive outcomes aren't always just convictions, of course. They can include many other outcomes as well. But it is troubling. It is troubling because the number of positive outcomes that we would like to see from criminal behaviour is higher than we're able to get at the present time. Simon, explain why.
Yeah, I mean, if that at the top of 26 sort of correlates back across to an extent to the data on page 19 that we looked at earlier. I mean, again, there's nothing here that isn't a national trend. I think there are a number of things going on all at the same time. You know, we have got fewer people. We've got 500 fewer officers, and you can see the number of arrests has dropped away. Around about 13,000, I think, came through custody. If you'd see the later report, that also links into things like the necessity test being introduced, which was about 4 or 5 years ago. So now you have to have a necessity to arrest. You didn't used to have a necessity, so that reduced numbers. The idea of that was to push people towards out-of-court disposal. So I think there's a whole set of things going on. One is we're capturing more crime. You know, our crime audits have not been pretty, and they've been to this panel previously. That means we are capturing more of things as crimes, which means unless you increase your outcomes, then they drop away. I think there's been a change to the CPS thresholds around what it requires for a charging decision. Some of the stuff that we were doing, and this report reflects some of the changes that we made. The previous report commented about the timeliness of some of our criminal investigations, which we sought to hasten, because that was also having an effect. So there's a whole set of things all going on at the same time, which we're trying to make sure that we do lift up the positive outcomes. Positive outcomes is a pretty broad thing. It's things that are charged, it's cautions, it's conditional cautions, and it's the full remit of out-of-court disposals. So it is something that we are working on, and you know, I wasn't surprised that the HMI highlighted it, really.
Could I ask, through you, Chair, what is the role of the Crime Prosecution Service in influencing these figures?
I think, being as diplomatic and tactful as I always try to be, they have a role. Whether it's a particularly significant one in the total numbers, I'm not sure, but I think there are moments, and I think it's right to say it, when sometimes the police force and the Crown Prosecution Service don't always have the same view about a particular series of facts as to whether they tend to show guilt or not. I think Simon Rayfield has something to say on this.
I was going to be totally constructive. There is a piece of national work going on around outcomes, because what you've seen here is reflected across pretty much every force. That piece of work is being led by a senior Home Office official, together with the Deputy Chief Constable from the West Midlands. There has been a data request go to all forces, and then 8 forces have been visited. We were one of the 8 forces visited. So there is an action plan being put together nationally about things that might help increase outcomes. From what I know of where that work is, they're a pretty varied thing, from more investigators, more detectives. Some forces have real issues filling their detective slots. We're not one of those forces, but many forces do, through to some mechanical stuff. So, for instance, the Code for Crown Prosecutors was changed February, March time at relatively short notice. To me, that seems to require more work up front to get a charge than it used to. I'm not sure that's a good thing, but then I wouldn't think it was, would I? Because I'm a cop and it's all I've ever done and I don't know any different. So there is a piece of national work which is still ongoing. We were visited about 2 weeks ago. The poor person from the Home Office got trapped in an office with me, Rob Nixon and Dave Sandel, and got out an hour after he was supposed to have got out. So we were able to share candid views about policy and practical things that weren't helping.
Thank you. Just remind members, Maronisa, I think you were the first to raise this issue some months ago, if I remember correctly, which ended up, we invited Janine Smith, who is the East Midlands Chief Crown Prosecutor, along to talk to us, to which she declined. But having said that, she did meet Ewan and myself, and we were able to put questions to from the panel to her. I'm going to ask Ewan if you could dig that letter out, that response from Janine Smith, and send it round to the panel members again. Obviously lots of new members, I'm sure they'll be interested to see what she had to say, and we'll send it to the OPCC as well.
Chair, could I just make I just want to be really clear. We have a really positive relationship with the local Crown prosecutors. They have the same volumetrics problems as we have. And the other issue that the panel might just want to be cited on is there are sort of two bits to CPS. So if something really serious happens and we're dealing with the local office, we are dealing with the local office. For a day-to-day prisoner looking for a charge decision, that goes to what's known as CPS Direct. Some of you, dare I say, long in the tooth, will remember when Crown prosecutors were sat in police stations. That was retracted from and went to being available on the phone. That seems to me to be a constant point that is quite challenging. That is not within the control of the local chief Crown prosecutor. So there are sort of two bits to it. There's the local office and there's the national 24/7 access. So put really simply, if you want to charge someone with a theft, a burglary, you will probably be dealing with the national dial-in service, which is very different from dealing with a local Crown prosecutor who probably you're sat in the office with, surrounded by the case papers. So there are sort of two bits to it.
Thanks for that. Kevin, then Les.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll draw your attention to page 21 in the middle at the top. Halfway down it talks about area of improvement, and it's talking about the rules of disclosure, which is then referred to again on page 25 at the top of the page with regards to the understanding of disclosure when dealing with various cases. And there's a slight weakness within that as suggested here, which there's a new training development plan for investigators to be retrained after several years. Are we any closer to ensuring that disclosure is there? 'Cause it's vitally important, having been a witness or sitting on the bench and having disclosures which haven't been duly presented properly and cases falling foul and being vacated, which is quite serious in some cases. It's not a criticism, it's just an observation that we need to ensure that we've got confidence in that process. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a programme ongoing. You've got a variety of people. We've actually got new joiners at the moment. They are being trained in disclosure rules as they are. It's people like me, frankly, who remember the disclosure rules as they were, who need refreshing. So there's a programme ongoing. There's a really high national expectation that that's delivered because of all that has gone on. But the issue is a tricky one, and you might have seen in recent weeks the lively debate about whether a form should be served on victims explaining that we're going to look at their phones, which actually is something that in practice we've been doing for quite a long time. A year ago, we were in the national papers for failing to look at victims' phones. So somewhere in the middle of that lies what is required. And we have to get better at that, and there is a piece of work to highlight it. I suppose I'd just go back to the point, which is it's an area for improvement, so it's not got a recommendation, and I'm not trying to diminish it, but it's important. There's a big piece of work being done there. For the most serious cases, you've got sort of ninja level disclosure officers. Their permanent role is disclosure officer on the most serious of cases. And disclosure is really complicated in the digital and technological age. And so we're just working through that. But yeah, there's a programme ongoing.
Okay, Les.
Thank you, Chair. Forgive me, I don't think this has been captured, but Lord Bart, on page 19, and draw back to that bottom graph of the victims who are not prepared to come forward and support the police. Thinking around the victim first policy, and I suspect within this there are a lot of repeat victims. Are you happy that operationally there's a system in place that can intervene at an appropriate point? If it's the third domestic abuse, is there a system in there that can actually intervene and actually protect those victims?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I am. I think every effort is made. As you say, many domestic violence cases are repetitious. Chief said that looking at that figure on bottom of page 19, very similar to the national feeling. But if you look at the robbery one, that's perhaps the exception, where more victims of robbery don't see it through in Leicestershire than the average. And I suspect those robberies are very much street robberies. I suspect youth on youth. That doesn't make it any better. It makes it another worry. Someone who has robbed, a kid who is robbed, for example, leaves it, doesn't bother with it, may complain but won't take it further. But I do think the structures, particularly around domestic violence, have now, and that's what your question's about really, have advanced so much that I think every single effort is made, whether it's a first timer or not, to try and persuade the victim to come forward and stay forward. Thank you, Jack. Thank you. Can I just, yeah, please.
Any other questions
Chairman.
on? Oh, sorry.
Just to add to that, I mean, the Victim First contract does specifically say that the service has to target repeat victims. So there is a strong emphasis in the contract itself, and they do deal with them in I don't know what the term is, but it's something like a more assertive way. So they're more outgoing. They try and engage with people. They go the extra mile to get hold of them.
I believe we've exhausted questions for 18 to 33, so we move on to the next section, which is force in context, which is pages 35 through to 48. Questions? Hemant, is that how you pronounce it?
Hemant, that's right.
Thank you. Hemant, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. It's on page 42. Yes, two observations were made with regards to workforce capabilities. One was regarding the understanding of the workforce capabilities itself, and second, conduct of leadership skills audit. And it goes on to state that efforts should be made to improve both of them. So can PCC reassure us that these things are taken into account and things are in place and they are being followed through?
I'm sorry, the question to me, I'm going to pass it on to Simon if I may. Sure. Yeah, thank you.
I'm tempted to just say yes. The report says what it says. We did challenge some of this at the time. We have a skills audit. There are some issues about some of the sort of databases that's kept on and how accessible it is. So we have to sort of take it on the chin. So, yes, we've been doing lots of stuff around trying to identify skills, make sure that we've got those captured. Skills can be anything from public order trained, firearms trained, through to language skills and everything in between. And of course, lots of those have to be accredited. And we've been doing lots of work around a leadership skills audit as well. So it's work in progress. When the HMI comes back, they will definitely be looking at these areas of work, because in the context of the report, they haven't highlighted much. They will definitely come back and have a look at it. I think we were probably slightly better than they've portrayed us, but then I would, and I'm biased. So yeah, there's loads of work going on.
All right, thank you. I have Berenice and then Deborah.
Chair, it's a very general question. It's not from a specific page. Is that okay? But it's to do with workforce. I mean, whichever way you look at it, this is a good report, and I think it's credit to yourself and the leadership and everybody that does policing in Leicestershire and county, as well as the volunteers that support policing. I suppose my question, well, two questions. One is, given that this is a good report, and that Leicestershire, and it's been done under constrained resources in terms of staffing and workforce and other resources, how confident are you, Lord Back, that the allocation in terms of budgets, which we've never got a kind of a fair allocation in Leicestershire, is going to be good, given the fact that actually government might look at this and Treasury might look at it and say, well, actually you've done really well under current resource. You really don't need any extra money. Okay, exactly. And And I suppose my second question is very similar. Is how confident are you, given, and my recollection is the last time we were here approving the precept and the budget, as I recall, part of the investment in terms of workforce and capacity came from reserves. And therefore, how confident are you, given the changes in terms of the demand on policing generally, that this sort of kind of what I would call good performance is maintained, that not only is it maintained, but that it's improved and that we're able to tackle the increased demand? So basically 2 questions there.
Well, thank you very much for very good questions, if I may say so. Of course, if we follow the logic through, the better the report, the worse it would be. I think we'll settle for the good report for the moment. But you're absolutely right. Any government, this one included, the new one that will come in quite shortly, will of course have seen. Will see this report. Well, I only state the obvious, I think. Will see this report and say, some of the complaints they made weren't quite as genuine as they sounded at the time. I don't think it shows that. I think for once, actually, HMIC, I think it took them a long time to realise the effects of austerity on policing. And I think in the last 18 months or so, 12 months, they've come round to the view, and indeed the guy who runs HMIC, Tom Windsor, has said so in terms himself. I'd like to look at it this way round. If we can do this well in these fields with such limited resources, what could we do if we had what I would say are the proper resources that a modern police force needs with a growing population? I think it shows what's possible, and rather than saying, oh well, they should be satisfied with what they've got. Of course, the worry is always the next report, and that's what I think. Much as of course we always enjoy complaining about the inspectorate and saying, they don't know what they're talking about, they don't know what they're doing, and all the rest of it. In fact, it's a crucial part of the public sector, is that what is being done is inspected objectively and well. And we have to be ready. I think the force has to be ready. That they can't rely on this to see them through the next time there's a report. So it's constant trying to improve. But actually, I still maintain there is a need for extra resources, just simply to have more police officers in the force. I don't say all on the streets, but to have more police officers in the force. That's the way we're going at the moment. But it won't take us back to 2010, which wasn't perfect anyway.
So, Chair, just quickly, I'm just trying to dig out there. The HMI's got to do all 43 forces. This set, ours was one of 14 that came out, and the national that came with it basically said, based on the first 14 forces, we see a picture of committed and capable police service that's showing signs of real strain. There are massive pressures around competing priorities that, if not managed correctly, could see service deterioration. So the kind of national context, I suppose what this does, this judges us against what we've got. One of the challenges that we have in discussing it, for instance, Durham, who have consistently scored outstanding and done really, really well in these processes, get £14 a head per citizen more than we do. If we were funded at the same level per citizen, I would have another £14 million to spend. And I'm not saying that in any, I totally respect what Durham have achieved, and they have significant pockets of I was going to say depravity. I don't mean depravity. I mean deprivation. So, although when I was a student there were moments of depravity. So there is just a thing. I think one of the things the HMI are trying to balance here is relative funding. How do you apply an absolute standard against funding that's different is a tricky thing. For us, the budget that you previously approved, will enable us, I hope, to deal with some of the issues highlighted here around timeliness, around jobs that we just put brutally don't get to at the moment. That will enable us to have more resourcing 24/7, some more within neighbourhoods and some more dealing with vulnerability and investigations. So I think they're all areas that we probably all agree were important, and you know, hopefully that will reflect in a year's time, if when they come again, all those people won't be in place, but I think they would be in a position to say we see the first signs that putting some more people into this bit is helpful or not. But you know, the point is well made, and the wider challenge, as for all of you, I'm very aware you all sit wrestling with council budgets, is this is about judging how we use a finite resource. It isn't the same as saying there's too many people doing that or too few doing the other.
Deborah.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 4 points, but I'll try and be as quick as I can. First one is on page 35 about local...
Are you going to ask them all in one go?
Do you want me to?
Please.
Right, okay. The first one's on page 35, which is about local policing. And are we going to see that change with the budget that's coming in this year, that we will be spending more per head on local policing, was the first point on page 35. Second one on page 37 was the third paragraph down about Leicestershire Police not having a comprehensive understanding of the skills and capacity of the workforce. When will you be expecting some progress on that one? Page 44 again, the force little improvement on developing and managing talent. When are you expecting to have an update on that one? And then also on page 46 about the comprehensive audit there, which they're all quite similar, so I'm just really, what timescales are you expecting there? And I just want to add, overall the report's really good, but obviously we're going to pick out those little bits that we want updates on. Thank you, Chair.
I think Simon will be able to answer those better than me, but as far as local policing is concerned, it depends what definition you use of local policing, I think. But if you mean by local policing just more police officers on the street as neighbourhood police officers, that's one answer. But if you mean by local policing moving police out, doing various different roles in areas such as investigation, such as response, and neighbourhood policing, that's a different conception of local policing. In the second one, yes, certainly, I think the more that we're putting into money that we're putting into police numbers in the next 18 months or so will mean that local policing in the wider sense will be a good deal better off. It will actually, I think, be a little better off in terms of police officers on the street as well, but Simon may be able to help me with that. There will be an element of that, but I'm really keen to say that modern policing isn't just about policemen policing on the streets, important though that is. There are many, it's more complex than that. And what we need to make sure, for example, is that our response is enough people in response to be able to respond quickly to crime wherever it occurs in a very big geographical area, some of which is quite remote. I think I would answer your first question. Simon, I'll pass on to the others.
I mean, I think the answer to your question is it may change slightly. It's a pretty broad brush. So what this is a kind of activity analysis process whereby you have to identify in what category every post sits. And some of them are really obvious, like a neighbourhood team. Some of them aren't quite so obvious. So I think the answer to your question is it may well change a little bit. But within this are all sorts of anomalies. So you'll see that under intelligence, it suggests we've got more people. Police intelligence is everyone's favourite oxymoron, of course. But within that, it says we've got more people in intelligence, but we're the employing force for lots of the regional intelligence units. So they've been counted in there, and in a way you need to sort of discount them because they're doing regional functions. So it doesn't tell you as helpful a story as it may do, or as it may appear, I think, is the answer. I mean, the other things, I did just touch on the, we've been doing loads of work around capabilities mapping and skills. The talent bit, to be honest, was the bit that we argued with the most. But again, we take it on the chin, it's in here. We have a track record of producing senior people who go on to be hugely successful in a variety of local forces at very senior levels. What this was saying was you need to be better at capturing how you develop that talent through. and they weren't persuaded by our argument, which was, well, look at all these people who've come through. So we're trying to get better at capturing that and making sure that we identify talent. You know, there is a tendency, I think, for police people processes to be almost like a hurdles event to see where you fall over, rather than a talent event where you see where you can help as many people as you want to over the fences. So, but that work is, I mean, it's sort of beyond ongoing, really. I mean, it would, if the panel wants an update on that in a different way, it wouldn't be difficult to do. You know, we have a people board. The people board is identifying people to go onto the National Fast Track Scheme. The people board is identifying who should be promoted. We've got, you know, a 9-box grid and all the kind of things I think many organisations would have to identify who's talented, who's just really brilliant at what they do every day, and we should encourage them to do it. So that's there. And I'm sorry, I lost what the fourth point was.
46, page 46.
Which was which bit?
Future workforce, was it?
Yeah, there's two. One on page 37 was about understanding what skills and capabilities of the workforce. And that sort of ties in with page 46 about your operational and technical competencies of police. So it's asking for an audit. So it's really just, to me, that both of those tie in together about what your workforce is, what skills you've got, where you're missing, and that's obviously what you need to target. So I'm just really an update on when we're likely to see that happening.
Well, I think that, you know, those things are all there now. We could do an update for the next meeting very easily about where we are with that. Yeah, I think the other thing you see within it is that we're now, having been kind of looking, if I say inward and down, you know, we've been very focused on making books balance and reducing in numbers and not having promotion processes and having recruitment freezes and things. And now we're in a position, thanks to the budget that we've now got, where we can look up and out a bit more, and we do need to be kind of revamping those bits that have kind of closed down a bit. So, I mean, it would be very... It might be best to do an update for the next meeting, because lots of this we've kind of got in place. I mean, to be honest, this was one of those things. If we'd been one of the later forces inspected, I think it would have said a different thing. But we can't argue with that. They come when they come, and they find you as they find you. If they come 2 months later, we would have been saying, "Look, here's the shiny document," and they probably would have been happier. So, I don't know what's best, Joe.
If it's just an update, then obviously we'll have that when you can get that ready. Yeah. And if we email it out to all members, would that be okay? Yep.
I'm not sure if it needs to come back for discussion or whether it's something that would be suitable for email. I'm not sure what your back would feel.
We will email it out, and if there's any queries come up, we'll put it on the agenda. Okay. Les.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just slightly curious around this point, because the inspector has referenced this lack or failure of talent catching, talent mapping, skills development, diddly-dee. But they actually haven't been specific in what the Chief Constable and the OPCC are actually not doing. Now, it's all right to say they're not doing it, but what is it they're not doing, if that makes sense? So what I'd be really interested in is, Simon clearly has an answer, but, you know, can we go back to the inspector, ask them what they're saying that Simon and his team are not doing relative to what they expect, and then once we know what they say they're not doing, we'll be able to match with what Simon says they are doing, because I sense Simon's slightly frustrated that they are actually doing quite a lot of this work, but otherwise you want to challenge HMO and Majesty Inspector.
I think the answer's tucked away in page 44. Just above the area for improvement box, there was an area for improvement in 2017 which was around talent management and skills mapping, and they felt that we had not, because one of the things that happens with this, and you know, you'll all be familiar with inspection regimes, we get a request for all sorts, data, goodness knows, and they felt that we had not completely discharged the area for improvement from the year before. They felt we couldn't adequately describe what we'd done and how we'd done it. And so the reason that it's there, I think what they're saying is you have not completely captured how you have mapped the skills of your people and how it is immediately accessible. So if you need to know now, this minute, I need a firearms officer that speaks French, can you produce one? kind of thing. And you know, and they're fair. You know, I think at the time they walked in the door, we didn't convince them of that. And then the other bit was about talent mapping, where I think, I suppose one of the reasons I'm a bit irritated at us, because I think for me, this is an area where we can produce a coherent, sensible answer, and we maybe haven't helped ourselves. So at the end of the day, I'm probably cross with myself more than I am with the inspectorate. So I think that's what this is about. So it does reference the previous report, and that was the gist of the previous report.
Thank you. I think Les has got that, and so have I. Thanks for the question, though, Les. Have we get exhausted on this section? Okay, thanks very much, members.
Chairman, I think I used the expression a new government. What I meant was, of course, a new administration. Because I heard some laughter in the among the panel. A new administration, I think, is the proper way of describing what is likely to happen.
There's an old saying about digging a hole. Members, legitimacy. That's quite appropriate. We move on to that one, isn't it? So page 49 right through to the end of this paper, which is page 59. So Maranisa, and then Charmaine, yep. So over to you, Maranisa.
Just a quick one. This is in relation to disproportionality. So if you look at page 51, and I'm assuming this is from the inspection in 2017. I mean, that's the way I read it. And then the response from the force was in relation to carrying out the disproportionality research with DMU. I suppose where I'm coming from is that if these were the figures in 2018, what action has been taken, and how assured are you, this is to the PCC, that this is being tackled and that the disproportionality that exists is fair and free of discrimination and bias? This is the stop and search. Yes, absolutely. This is about black and minority ethnic individuals 1.5 times more likely to face stop and search, and then black or black British individuals 4.4 times more likely to face stop and search. And then it goes on to page 53, where they talk about the force having carried out some sort of research or audit in terms of disproportionality and disparities. But it doesn't say anything else about what action's been taken. And I think what I am sure the panel would be really interested is, have these figures changed, and what action not only has been taken, but that if there is any disparity, it's not as a result of any sort of bias or discrimination.
Yeah. I can't answer the question, I don't think, about how up-to-date these figures are and what, whether they've been overtaken by more recent figures. I'm not sure whether Simon would be in a position to do so. I think the latest figures I showed show that, interestingly, black or black British individuals are most likely to be stopped and searched. Following them, it was white individuals more likely to be stopped and searched, and then Asian individuals, Asian background individuals, were more likely to be stopped and searched. So if you notice, the phrasing in those two points sort of bear that out, I think, to some extent. I mean, I hardly need to tell the panel the changes that there have been over the last number of years in relation to stop and search, which I think is generally agreed wasn't something that was carried out brilliantly by forces up and down the country. And the restrictions that were put on it, the need to do it in a lawful fashion, I think have become the rule now, not the exception. I mean, rather, it's exceptional if they're not done properly. There's a really important question for the public to answer, public overall, and that is that at a time of rising violence, and when knife crime, for example, is greater than it has been in the past, without wanting to exaggerate it, does that make, and when drug possession and passing on drugs, supply of drugs is also rising, is that a justification for more lawful stop and search, or isn't it a justification? Now, the figures around that, the academic figures around that, seem to me to be kind of mixed. It's difficult to say. But I have to say that as Police and Crime Commissioner, I am fairly convinced that the way in which this is done in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland is reasonable and sensible. Because you do want to combat, you do want to catch drugs, you do want to catch knives if you possibly can. But it's vital to look at these proportions as a test of whether you're doing it properly or not. Now, the Chief may well have, from an operational point of view, something to add to that. What the Ethics Committee... Which,
do you want me to just add that?
Yes, would you add that?
No, I just checked with Angela to make sure I was right on this, that we regularly review them at the Ethics Committee. Scrutinise actual cases and go through them on a regular basis. Now, the Ethics Committee is an independent group of lay people who look at the cases and ensure that they're being dealt with properly and with integrity. And that those cases have been reviewed positively all the time. The next one in June, this month. So it is a regular review process. And you wanted to add?
Yeah, Chair, just quickly if I can. Page 53, the sort of DMU report. I think the DMU report is an example of the HMI trying to answer what they've... It's sort of within this report. So in 2017, they made national recommendations that forces should, and you can see them at the top of page 53. Part of our response to that was the DMU work we'd done on disproportionality was published, so it was a sort of research piece. I guess the things I would stay around stop and search, I mean, firstly, it's very vigorously scrutinised, and as Paul's alluded to, and let's be really clear, these are stop and searches that are on body-worn video. So the panel dip samples, they choose what they watch, and they watch a stop and search as it was recorded on an officer's body-worn video, and they are able to comment, and that comment can be, what a jolly good job was done, or it can be, we thought you could have handled that a bit differently and a bit more tactfully. I think the most striking thing about the data is, of course, that we don't do many compared to many other forces. If we wind ourselves back to 2010, we were a force that attracted the attention of the EHRC, who felt we were stop and searching way I mean, the figure of 4.4, it was about 10 at one point, in terms of 10 times more likely. So it's something we take very seriously. It's something that we try and test with communities. There are some particular challenges, and if you look at things like knife crime, if you are from a black community, you are more likely to be a victim of knife crime than if you are from a white community. And if you then look at the reasons we're using stop and search, so stop and searching for weapons would be one of those reasons. So there's some really tricky issues in here. We take it very seriously. To be blunt, we went through a period a couple of years ago where I was worried we weren't stopping enough people in general terms, and just ballpark, in a typical day we will stop 10 people. The predominant number of whom will be white, actually, in terms of the total figures. So all our coercive powers are scrutinised by lay panels, and the ethics panel's work around this has just been mentioned. So that's a figure that has reduced. It is a figure that is still an issue. The numbers of actual stops are quite small, and the other thing that we have tried to do with the support of the group that oversee, who are community members in effect, is try and focus the geography of this around the geography of crime types where stop and search could be a useful thing to be doing. So it's something we take hugely seriously. The disproportionality has more than halved over time, but it is still disproportionate, and we continue to work on that.
Just really quickly, I mean, in a sense, if you look at the figures are still quite startling, and it's good to have that sort of reassurance that this is something that you're keeping in mind. I think the point that you make is that it's got to be lawful. The way the report reads, it doesn't read that way. It's basically giving you figures, and it's saying there's a disparity audit, and so what? So I think there's got to be an assurance point for the public as well as to what is it we're doing, because you do need stop and search in order to prevent crime in reality. But I think the figures themselves are they're concerning to me.
So just to sort of build on that, I mean, in a way, there are different things we do. You know, the legitimacy bit is probably the most important bit of the report in a way, because it's about how we treat our own people and how we work with the community, and we work totally on trust, and it's a kind of litmus test for that. If we look at the bottom of page 52, it is in the bundle. In effect, they've carried over the previous grading, but have dip sampled to check that it seems okay. And what that found was that 95% of the searches that they dip sampled had what they regarded as acceptable, reasonable grounds recorded. With the ones that they didn't feel, my sense would be most of them, when further explored, were okay, but that they did need further exploring. And, you know, clearly, just so people can be clear, we have to produce a record in writing of every stop search. So what they were doing was dip sampling those records and saying, does that look like a lawful stop search as recorded? So 95% of them passed at first go. The other chunk needed a bit of work, which it shouldn't do, because the officer's obligation is to record it in a way that makes sense. So I think the quality assurance you're looking for is there, albeit it's tucked away at the bottom of page 52.
Thank you, Simon. Sharman.
My question, Lord Bark, is in relation to page 50. The proportion of black, Asian and minority ethnic people within the force is less than half that reflected within the local population. And I just wanted to know what the force is doing in terms of mirroring what is actually in the population within the force.
Thank you for the question. Yes, it's something that is of great concern on a constant basis for myself and Kirk and the Chief Constable too. We do a huge amount of work as far as this is concerned, and all kinds of ways of recruiting those from ethnic minorities, from BME backgrounds, have been tried and are being tried as we speak. And it goes without saying that our percentage is higher than the average in the UK, but so you would expect. What it isn't, and this is what you're asking, I think, is that it's not good enough, and we have to improve it. So we've looked very, very hard at the way in which recruitment takes place, who applies, and then when recruitment takes place, and then what happens during the course of recruitment to mean that the end product is that there isn't sufficient or a better figure than this one. This figure has improved, actually, and is improving all the time. But there is a national part of recruitment, what they call the search, which is a kind of interview arranged by the College of Policing, where I think over the years statistics show that a larger number of ethnic minority candidates are not successful than at any other stage of the process. And that leads to the result that the figures aren't as good as they should be. But huge efforts are made now when recruitments are going on, as they are at the present time. The police go to different faith centres, whether it be mosques or gurdwaras or temples, in order to try and persuade particularly youngsters that this is a career for them. And slowly but surely, the figures are going up. The test will be in the next year and a half when we really are recruiting larger numbers. Chief himself has set up a committee, a goal group as they call it, on which both Kirk and I sit, which deals primarily with trying to find a way through this dilemma of why are these recruitment figures not as good as we want them to be. Chief, you've done a lot of work on this. What have you got to add to that, really?
I don't know that I want to add lots. We take it really seriously. We look at it all the time. I chair a group that is trying to look at how we go about recruiting, retaining, and promoting as well, because the other gap we have is in seniority. We've gone through a period in the past where we had some senior people who were from BME communities. They retired. There was a gap then below, so at the moment the most senior person in the organisation, it would be Detective Chief Inspector kind of rank. which, you know, in policing means there's still quite a bit of headroom there. So we're trying to look at how we can support talent. We've actually changed our processes of recruiting to a more values-based interview process, and that seems to have initially kept more people who are BME within the processes. We actually did a report for this panel, the city hall meeting. Was that the last one or the one before? I suppose. I suggest, is it okay? I mean, if Ewan could dig that paper out and maybe share it with new members, because the paper tried to capture all of that, but you know, we have a challenge in that there is a kind of legitimacy gap, which is we aren't like the community that we police. It's particularly acute, you know, 20%, whatever this figure is. It's very difficult on the varifocals. It says 20%. I actually would think it's a slightly higher figure than that. And of course, that is predominantly about the city. So we sort of police the city, which is really different to the counties. And this is a kind of averaging of that. So it's something we're taking really seriously. You know, the aim for us would be that the big pot of recruits that we start off with every time is 21-22% from BME communities, because that's what the world we're policing. And that means that because the brutal truth in all of this is we get 7, 8, 9, 10 applicants for every police officer job that we have. So there is a bit of this process where people have got to come out of the process at some point. The other thing that I just put as context for the panel, and can be my stat of the day perhaps, by 2023, 42% of the force can have retired. Now, if they all go, my eyes did that as well when I was told that. I was like, okay, if they all choose to retire, then that means by 2023 we've got to, and that's the police officer strength, and a third of the organisation is staff. But by 2023, 42% of the force could retire. So that means by 2023 we've potentially got to replace 42% of the force, which, to put it in ballpark, is 800-ish new recruits, and it reflects that 30 years ago there was significant recruiting. That's quite a challenge. Are there that number of people who will meet the standard? Discuss. Can we recruit them in a way that they are demographically more like the population that we serve? BME, male, female, gay, straight, whatever, you know, is a big thing for us at the moment, which we're working through. You know, we've changed how we recruit. We've, you know, we have a kind of rolling recruiting roadshow going out in local communities. And being candid, you know, the panel can help us with that. You know, so it is a big thing.
Thank you. You and Will send that paper around. Yeah, because it's also in the minutes, actually, if you tend to look at it. But even so, I thought it was appropriate that the question was answered, because there's a lot of new members here today. So thank you then, Sharman. I don't believe there's any other questions on this paper at all. So I'm just going to use 2 quotes, really. Simon said right at the start, the first time ever had good all the way through. Maranisa said, whichever way you look at it, it's a good report. And I fully support both those statements. I'm going to move a recommendation. We note the report. All in favour? Thank you very much, members. Moving on to nighttime economy, pages 61 to 68. Paul, Willie, you'll introduce the paper.
I'm going to pass straight on to Paul, the
Chief
Executive. Important for the panel to understand, Paul, when it comes to this, quite fresh as an issue, which is really, I think, very refreshing that a kind of new mind comes to this quite old issue of nighttime economy. It doesn't just apply to the city, of course. It applies, as the report makes clear, to other parts of our county as well. So I immediately pass on, if I may, Chair, to Paul to introduce.
I can safely answer. And if Alan won't mind me answering for Rutland as well, it's a big issue in Melton and Oakham.
I did imagine that, yeah.
And Uppingham.
Yes. Paul.
And everywhere else as well. No, I did come fresh to this. I think the challenge here is how far can I get before Simon jumps in and starts saying a few things here and there, because it's a subject that Simon's very familiar with and very knowledgeable about, and I found his input invaluable in this. So I'll invite him as well to come in. But as Lord Barker said, it was we've taken the view that these are our reports, and we do the scrutiny and the background research, obviously clearly informed by the police to understand it. But I've sort of done a bit of research to get the report together, not being that familiar with the issue prior to that. Although it is an issue in the police and crime plan, it's not one of those issues that's had the level of scrutiny at the Strategic Assurance Board that other issues have had, like modern slavery or so on. So the issues as I see them. So the development of an effective approach. The input I've had is that really what we've had is a transition from an approach to policing nighttime economy where we have maximum number of police on the streets dealing with the issues directly, to a more targeted approach where we focus on issues such as licensing and try to manage the licensing issues and also keep the licensed premises informed and work closely with the owners of licensed premises to ensure they're doing things as well as they can, and resisting applications for licenses where they're deemed to be inappropriate, or applying conditions where conditions are required. Now, I hadn't realised quite the extent of that, and there are some stats in there that give you an indication of how many licence applications are resisted or where conditions are applied, and it was quite substantial. So there's an awful lot of work goes on around the licensing areas. Another term that was unfamiliar to me is that of saturation zones. Saturation zones, again, I stand to be corrected by Simon, but saturation zones are areas wherein we believe that there are already sufficient licensed premises, and we really don't want any more because that will impact on nighttime economy offences. And those areas that you see highlighted there, particularly in Leicester, Hinckley, Loughborough and Ashby, already at the moment. So there are areas where actually we're keeping a limit on it and trying to reduce the number of extra licences that are available. It's an area, obviously, that requires multi-agency impact. Licensing committees are multi-agency processes, and it requires work across different agencies, particularly local authorities. So this is an area where pretty much everyone in the room will have an interest and where there'll be some input from yourselves. It requires that some sort of problem solving across different agencies to try and resolve particular issues about particular licensed premises. It involves dealing with key individuals, perhaps through joint action groups and so that other forums wherein we identify those people who are responsible or potentially responsible. So those are the approaches. It's not the traditional sort of saturation approach. It's more of a targeted approach, and the aim is to use intelligence and respond quickly to issues as they arise. Now, when looking at in addressing this, I had a look at the operational order that drives the work, and the operational order talks in particular about the sort of measures of success. The key measure of success is around the level of nighttime economy offences that are occurring, and it's very hard to measure the impact on that. So what you have in the report is a sort of first attempt to look at the sort of impact we've had on those kind of high level areas, the actual number of offences that are committed. Now, I don't know if you've got reports in colour, but mine aren't in colour, which makes it rather tricky to identify orange lines and blue lines if it's in black and white. But if you look at the two graphs, the first graph shows you a trajectory, a dotted line trajectory going up, which shows you how things were progressing prior to the introduction of the operational order, and the second dotted line is going in the opposite direction, which shows the impact, the trajectory of these offences after the introduction of the operational order. So clearly it's going in the right direction, but it's not going down massively. It's going slightly down, but not massively down. So that would suggest that the offences are still occurring regularly, but they're not occurring at the rate or increased rate of frequency that they were. The more promising bit is the focus on the violence with injury offences, because those are clearly the ones that matter most, clearly the ones that are most targeted. And here you can see again the same sort of pattern, but a stronger dip in the trajectory of offences that occur that cause violence with injury. So again, the impact on the offences that are seen as the priority is most significant. Now that all looks very good, and if I left it there, you'd all be saying this is great and really effective and doing a good job. But again, with discussion with Simon, I mean, Simon's view is that this is an area that is dominated by the nighttime economy businesses. That is a big and growing and powerful trade, and it's a trade that is directly, or the growth of that trade, directly correlated to the type and number of offences that occur. And that is difficult for the police on their own to tackle. It needs stronger, I think this would be Simon's view, stronger multi-agency work, stronger measures to control the level of nighttime economy licences that are available, more input into the nighttime economy organisations to ensure that they're doing things as well as they could do. And just generally a much more integrated approach across different agencies to ensure that we're having the impact we want. So broadly speaking, I would say that those are the areas. This isn't something where I'd say we can complacently sit back and say, look, the trajectory of the offences is going in the right direction. Haven't we done well? Well, clearly that's positive. But there is, I think this will be Simon's view as well, there is more impact we could have, particularly by working across agencies more effectively. And at that, I'll invite Simon to add anything he'd like to.
I mean, yeah, I'll just be brief, Chair. I mean, we've tried to take a risk-based approach. I'm sure you'll all remember when the licensing legislation changed and it was going to create those sort of European-style boulevards full of people parading in their finery while small children played and their parents enjoyed a sophisticated glass of wine. I don't know if that happens in Melton, Joe, but it doesn't seem to me that is kind of been what has achieved. My abiding concern with all of this is, as Paul's expressed, it seems to me we, between ourselves, the ambulance service and A&E, are dealing with a lot of the sort of short-term emergency type issues in a way that isn't a particularly preventative way, and that between us we need to come up with a better solution. This issue skews our whole operational model to be able to resource Friday and Saturday nights, to be able to resource Saturday and Sunday mornings when the cells are full, skews our whole operational model. And when you're saying, where's my beat officer, I've not seen him or her, well, you know, ask them where they've been. And Willie and I have had quite a vibrant discussion. By that I mean we haven't always agreed about abstractions. You know, why are neighbourhood officers being abstracted away? Well, on occasion because of the demands put on them by the nighttime economy. So, you know, we have had to change how we have approached this. You know, and just to spell it out, and we should, you know, go back to the panel wanted to understand around treatment services and partners and how to deal with licensing. You know, the kind of thing we're routinely having on a Friday and a Saturday night in the city. You've got a joint crewed, what I would call the polamb, but in effect it's an ambulance with a cop in it. Because by having that available to deploy, we can stop so many people going to A&E, and the cop's there so that the drunk doesn't punch the ambulance person. You know, it is that crude, and I just worry that it is left to those who emergency respond. And I worked New Year's Eve, which was memorable for many reasons. I would invite any of you to go and observe New Year's Eve. I mean, the fact that you probably haven't chosen to be in some of these locations on New Year's Eve is interesting. But I just think there's a big issue here that we need to deal with, and the crime numbers are just but one manifestation of that. A&E admissions, which seem to be going up. The long-term impact of some of the drink stuff is a really interesting thing that all of you who are on health and wellbeing boards will be sat looking at. Street cleaning would be another interesting thing to look at, the morning after. So for me, this is a big issue, and the paper sort of says, we need to all be thinking about that. But I do think if we step outside of it, when the licensing law was changed, I don't believe it was changed with a view to it being as it is now. It was intended to create a cosmopolitan, civilised centre, town, city, whatever it is, and I don't believe that's where we are.
Thank you, Simon. Les has indicated he wants to ask a question, but what I'm going to do, just help you, Les, I'm going to take each section as it comes, so I've asked you to be ready for it. So I'm looking at page 61. I think we can start at paragraph 5, current position and objectives, and that will take us through to paragraph 7. Any questions? Okay, next section, work undertaken, paragraph 8, going right through to paragraph 34. Any questions there? No. Page 67, next section is next steps, paragraph 35, going through to the end. Les. Yeah.
Chair, thank you. I'm just curious, and I guess it's one for Lord Bark, is to roll back the clock some time. And for my sins, I actually worked with pubs and things for 30 years of my life. The introduction of personal licences was one way to combat, this issue about irresponsible licensees, irresponsible licence holders, allowing customers to become so inebriated they lost control, and it was to do with that personal licence, where that personal licence holder was absolutely responsible for their licensed premises. So I'm curious, Lord Bark, if within this, the NTA is huge for the UK. I can't imagine any government's going to particularly try and clamp down on it because of its economic value. But actually, is there a strategy within your role, or are you asking the operational team to actually get back to these basics where it is the licence holder that is held accountable for the conduct of their customers? Because that's where it all started.
That's a really interesting idea. So who would you say now is liable in terms of a establishment that has a full licence? Perhaps I could ask you that back.
Well, there's two, isn't there? One is the actual ultimate landlord. So if it's a licensed chain, then they have to be responsible. But equally, it is down to those personal licences, which are issued by the local magistrates, as far as I'm aware. And in the old days, Simon may or may not be old enough, but there used to be the licensing sergeant used to stand at the magistrates' court and just say no. And that was it. There was no licence issued to that establishment.
As I understand it, that from time to time still happens. The licensing committee is a committee of the City Council, and the police have a authorised officer who will comment on behalf of the police in terms of particular application. And as I understand it, and I think the report shows through there, a number of those that are turned down. So I suspect that maybe the personal licensees aren't held to account as much as they were in the days that you're talking about. And that is probably an issue that isn't so much one for me or the police as it is for society as a whole, and the way in which they approach this issue. I mean, you made the point. Any government, any local authority is going to want the economic activity that nighttime economy brings, particularly when there's not much other income coming in. So I think this is a very vexed and very difficult subject. One of the things I just say as a sideline, what really I think is one of the worst things that the police have to deal with is the fact now that throwing out time, if I can call it that, at nightclubs, isn't sort of, let alone 11 o'clock, isn't sort of 2 o'clock, but is sort of 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, when people are getting on with their lives, you know, the new day's begun. But that's a time when I suspect the police are needed as much as ever. And that, I think, is another modern tendency that is to be deplored.
Les, you have a...
Just one bit to add to that. The bit that I was surprised about was I put some stats in there about the level of conditions imposed on licences, and I was quite impressed with that. There was quite a lot of proactive work done on that. The inspector who leads in this area, though, was concerned about the number of occasional licences for a one-off festivals, that sort of thing, that can generate quite large numbers. And in his view, that was becoming more of a problem, and they were less able to get a clearer, tighter handle on that sort of thing. I don't know if that's your view as well, Simon, but it was kind of lots and lots of little applications for one-off events and things like that were really causing a lot of problem now.
Yeah, so really it's just sort of trying to capture where we could help if we could, whether that's as a panel or as individual district or licensing authorities. But also, one of the problems that the police must face is well known, it's well documented, it's well recorded. The kids are actually hitting the nighttime economy already half cut. And therefore, you know, we're never going to be able to hold supermarkets account. I seem to remember it was tried some time ago. But actually, and I come back to Lord Bach, that it's got to be back down to the actual licence holders who are serving semi-inebriated, inebriated people that starts or contributes to that problem, because they're already hitting the town and they're already half cut.
It's true, the minimum pricing issue, which of course in Scotland they've dealt with in a slightly different way than they have here, and I think the jury's still out as to whether that's working or not. I mean, that could apply, but it really needs government. It clearly needs national legislation before it can be implemented, as I understand it. I mean, that's always struck me as being very, very potentially effective.
I think certainly to wrap this up, I mean, it is national legislation, and it is the licensing authorities, isn't it? Obviously, all the districts are the licensing authorities, and that's the way to work through. But ultimately, it's a Westminster national decision. Deborah.
Sorry, Chair, I didn't know where my question fell, so I'll just do it at the end. I think we've opened...
So that's why you're in the last section.
Yeah. I think we've opened a bit of can of worms. The way I see it, I think further work's needed with the licensing authorities, and I don't know if across all the districts we're all operating in the same way, and that's probably a further piece of work that we need to see how they're all operating. I've worked on licensing and licensing panels, and it's such a long-winded. I know in Loughborough the police there are really, PC Green particularly, is very hot on changing licences and conditions when there's issues, but it takes such a long time to get the same people in the same room to look at the licence that, you know, it's ongoing and ongoing. So I think there's a bit of an issue there. I think licensing authorities, we need to be putting more conditions on when it's saturation, especially in Loughborough. We've got areas that are really high saturation. And I think we need to be pushing back to these local businesses that they need to be sorting out some of their own security and having some more responsibility for what they're causing. And I understand what you're saying about economies growing, but it tends to go the other way because there's so much trouble. It becomes a no-go area, then no one will go out, and we end up with no economy. So we need to find that balance. But I really think it's the licence authority. I'd like to see some further work done across all the districts, the city and Rutland, to see how we're all operating and see if we can get something in place where we're all doing the same.
Can I agree with absolutely everything you've said? But I think there's a role for safety partnerships here, community safety partnerships, to look at this again, look at this issue in their districts, to see what more they can do. They'll be very much bearing in mind public feeling around an issue like this. But you're absolutely right. I think it's a real legitimate role of a statutory community safety partnership to be looking at what the consequences are in terms of the licensing position as it is now.
I think it's community safety partnerships working in conjunction with your bid organisation as well. And I have two, He-Man and then Michael, then we'll move on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Chair, Simon mentioned about the deployment of officers away from the community neighborhoods into city center nighttime economy element. And similarly, I think the issues about the match day economy, for example, when there's a Leicester City match going on and lots of police forces requisitioned over there. I think that the suggestion I'm trying to make here is that, yes, it is important and it is needed, but when these big commercial units make hundreds of thousands of pounds of profit, millions maybe, can we somehow not invoke their corporate social responsibility element of that if the police is being put there to support you or your business, why can't you put something back into the community by, for example, there are areas where we can certainly utilize, CCTV camera systems, which are, of course, City Council has only limited resources. Similarly, I think various other district councils have limited resources on them. So why can't we ask them to put something, dig deep into their pockets and help invest in supporting the neighborhood policing in some shape or form?
And that's what we do. We do ask big business, wherever it is, sporting or otherwise, to do just that. There seems to be a certain reluctance to agree to do just that, I'm afraid. But I know it's something that Simon feels particularly strongly about. Before he comes in, I haven't got long, I realise it. Before he comes in, it's interesting that in the way that the police are looking to how to operate, it's considered that match day, for example, taking as it has been doing too many police officers away from neighbourhood policing, should be probably involve more police officers who will be paid overtime rather than take them away from the districts. I know that's a matter of discussion that's going on at the present time, but your point's well made. Simon?
I guess there's two bits here. I mean, firstly, I would stress we have a very sensible relationship with Leicester City Football Club. Under their current leadership, that wasn't always the case under previous regimes, so I would want that to be really clear. But that being said, that's within a framework which there are various national court cases that describe what we can and can't charge for on a match day, and put brutally, that means we can charge for stuff in and around the ground but not away from the ground. And you might have noticed that Leicester Station is not directly next to the ground, so there is a sort of reality that when Leicester City play, we are responsible for policing the whole city, and some of that we do at cost to the public purse, and we do that by moving people around. The second bit is the licensing bit. I did enjoy the fact that when you were talking, Les was cackling. I mean, I think in the nicest sense, licensing is a fiercely competitive industry, and there is a thing about profit margins in all of this that influences it. I guess that the plea that I would make is that I do think it's worth, I'd really endorse what was said earlier, I think it's worth CSPs looking at this, looking at it pretty broadly, understanding some of the health consequences. I guess a sort of common sense test for all of us would be, if a loved one needs to go to A&E at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, do we think, oh, this is good, this will be really good fun, it'll be great at A&E on a Friday night, or do we think, I wish this had happened on a Monday or Tuesday or a Wednesday, and why do we think that? So I just remain concerned that emergency response from us, ambulance, and A&E is literally soaking up some of these issues. And I do realise New Year's Eve isn't typical, but there was a point on New Year's Eve when every ambulance in Leicestershire was stacked up outside A&E. And scattered amongst that were various of my police colleagues, including me. And I do realise New Year's Eve isn't typical, but why were they all there? Well, they were pretty much all there because of the effects of drinking. And between us, we need to work out a better answer than we've got at the moment.
Thank you. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just that I agree with everything everyone has said. It's a great concern for everyone in every district that we have at the moment with the availability easy availability of alcohol to everyone really in supermarkets and elsewhere. Certainly, just to sort of go on from what you were saying about CSPs, we have actually in Harbour instigated a programme with the police and our licensing department actually checking on licences in pubs, and it's resulted, yes, and it's resulted certainly in one pub actually being stopped serving alcohol completely until they comply with the regulations that are in place. I think it's a very useful sort of programme to instigate in each CSP, in each district really. I'd encourage everyone else to actually take that on board and actually go forward with it.
Okay, members, I don't believe there are any more questions. It's time to move on as well. I'm going to move the recommendation on page 61, recommendation number 2. All in favour? Les, sorry.
Can I just, excuse me, Chair, I just need to make an urgent phone call.
If that's all right with you, Chairman, and again, I think it is a good, strong report about a good service. So if I could ask Angela to just introduce it briefly. I know members will have read the paper. Angela.
I did say to members earlier on, one of the members at the introduction meeting to the panel, Nottinghamshire didn't do quite so well on this report. I did note the other month now. That's because I read Nottingham papers. So there you go.
Comment on that, I don't think.
Thank you, Chair. I will take you through some parts of the report. I'm quite conscious that some members will be quite familiar with independent custody visiting and others perhaps less knowledge. So this is the scheme whereby members of the public are recruited to go and visit in pairs those people who are detained in police custody. And the visits are ad hoc. They are planned by the volunteers themselves, and they will go into cells and speak to those people who are detained to check on their welfare and on their rights and entitlements. And basically that's what the scheme is about. This scheme came in back in the 80s. It was a result of rioting that took place at the time in places like Brixton, Lambeth, Manchester, Liverpool, even in Leicester actually. And Lord Scarman at the time looked into those riots, and this was one of his recommendations. The scheme itself became involuntarily. Leicestershire were at the forefront of that because we ran a pilot scheme here in Leicester which has continued all this time until 2002 when it was enshrined in legislation. So it is now a legal duty on a police and crime commissioner to have an independent custody visiting scheme in place. So I hope that brings everyone fairly up to speed on what it's all about. Okay, so the scheme in Leicestershire, this is the annual report. This is the end-of-year data on the report on how the scheme has operated throughout the year. There are 3 custody suites within the force area, Beaumont Leys, Euston Street and Keyham Lane. And each suite, we have a locally agreed target with the Chief Constable that each suite will be visited once a week. Now, they can be visited more than once, but no less than once, and that is the target for the visitors themselves to achieve. And you will see in paragraphs 7 to 9 there that each suite did receive a visit once a week, and that, can I say, is exceptional performance on behalf of the group of volunteers who undertake this role. And it's the first time we've never had just one area where we've missed one visit. So we are absolutely thrilled with the volunteers and the effort they've made this past year. There's a little bit there about access to a custody suite. That's one area that we do monitor in case there are any trends developing over the length of time that people turn up at a custody suite. And the reasons are, and I go back again to the history about mistrust at the time of the community and the police. So if custody visitors turn up at a custody suite and they're kept waiting for 3/4 of an hour every time, and they walk into a very pristine suite with everyone happy, you don't get a view that you're getting the real feel of what's going on there. So we do monitor that area, but we've had no issues of concerns over the past year. At paragraph 11, we do set out there how many detainees were in and spoken to at the time. And we do a system which is called self-introduction. Many years ago, we had a system whereby a member of the custody staff would go into the cell and introduce the custody visitors. There was a lot of dependence on that being how that was delivered. Some custody officers were very upbeat and others perhaps not so. And at that time we were running about 40% of detainees taking up the offer of a visit. Now the custody visitors themselves enter the cells themselves and introduce themselves. So we're actually getting a high proportion of visits, and that has nationally now been adopted. Moving ahead to paragraph 12, that's just to give you an idea of the number of visits over the charts, and those charts are the charts that the visitors themselves work from. At paragraph 13, we set out there the requests that come in from the custody visitors, the sort of things that they would ask for. And at paragraph 14, I have just picked out some areas there that were probably a little bit more interesting and did lead to a change in some of the things and how the police undertake their procedures and practices. There were some health and safety issues. Can I say that once the custody visitors have visited the detainees themselves, they will then do an inspection of the custody suite, which includes all areas that aren't being used: interview rooms, doctors' rooms, kitchens. They'll look at food, fridges. Part of the, if you give a detainee milk that's gone off, they're ever likely to be ill. It's everything that could impact upon that detainee's stay in police custody. So the health and safety issues are listed there. At the moment, we have 29 custody visitors. We monitor very closely people who leave the scheme, and we do get feedback, and we have amended some of our policies and practices over the years from feedback we have received. And just to give you some idea, that is set out from paragraph 16 onwards there, from interviews that we've held. It is quite a structured scheme in Leicestershire. We have team meetings with the whole team of custody visitors once a quarter, and the volunteer manager in the office will meet with the custody chief inspector on a quarterly basis. And we also have regular reports to the Strategic Assurance Board, which the Police and Crime Commissioner chairs. Can I say also, as it's run by our office, obviously the Commissioner is kept informed of any developments along the way that happen. Developments during the past year, the Independent Custody Visiting Association is our national association that we pay into. They provide us with quite a lot of guidance, training, etc. Lord Bark is on the management board of the association now, which is quite useful to us in the national sense. One big development throughout the year is that we have spent a lot of time planning for the introduction of an electronic reporting mechanism. This is done through an iPad, which is now kept in the custody suite itself. Up until now, it's been a form in triplicate that goes to 3 different places, and we have to hope it makes it to our office through the internal post, and then everything has to be entered into a system, and it's been quite laborious. So we have invested in an electronic app which the custody visitors will use the iPad in the suite, put the information in. All the management data is collected immediately. Emails go out to the key people in the force who need to know something to affect any problems that have been identified. And the custody visitors themselves can use that app to arrange their visits with their partners throughout the year with the rota that is at least 12 months in advance. So we are hoping, and it's only launched in April, but so far everything's looking good, and we are hoping to receive quite a lot of efficiency savings from that. As I said, we recruited during the past year now 29 custody visitors. If I can just mention the 2 awards that we've received through this year. We have achieved the Investing in Volunteers accreditation for the 3rd time. For anyone who's been involved in that, it's something like 9 different categories and 49 criteria overall that you have to evidence. And we are the only scheme in the region that hold that award at the moment, and have done so without failing since we did it way back in 2012. We've also achieved the Gold Award from the National Association, which has also been another big achievement, a similar sort of process. Regionally, we work very closely with our colleagues, not only to deliver conferences and training, but the scheme administrators meet on a regular basis. They look at performance across the region, they look at good practice, and we get a lot from that, and we will continue to work where we can with colleagues. I have included the equality monitoring data there. Can I say that we have attempted on the last recruitment round to recruit more young people. We felt that our demographics were going more to perhaps an elderly age range, and as such we did a lot of recruitment through Facebook, through Twitter, and we targeted local universities and colleges in the area as well. We also used our youth commission members to get word out, so I think that resulted in amending our demographic for the members in the scheme. I've just included some positive feedback that we've received throughout the year from the custody visitors themselves. And the conclusion is, for us, from where we sit, this has been an incredibly successful year. Every visit undertaken, 2 national awards, and a commissioner who's now on the national board of directors who gives us a national voice. And can I say the commissioner himself also has undertaken custody visits and will be doing so in the not too distant future with the new custody app, so he'll be using the electronic format of reporting. I'll say I've gabbled through it, Chair, but I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Angela. As I said right at the start, Leicestershire historically, certainly since 2009-10, have always done well at this. You've always been in the lead in that time as well. I don't know whether that's coincidence or not, Angela. I did notice right at the end of the report the word outstanding year is used somewhere, so obviously that has to be good. Members, what I'm going to do is we'll go through each section on the main report, but then I'll take the appendix as one. So page 69, background, paragraph 3. You're going to be quick, otherwise we'll be over. Organisation of the scheme in Leicestershire, 4 to 6. Visits undertaken, 7 to 9. Access to custody suite, 10. Detainees seen, not seen, 11. Day and time of visits, 12. Requests and issues raised by detainees, 13.
Chair.
Alan?
Chair. Looking at the breakdown of the requests and issues by the custody suite, Euston Street appears to have something like double the rest of them individually. I take the point that at the weekend it has twice as many cells as well, but they aren't there during weekdays. So is there some other explanation for why there are more complaints and queries from that particular site?
If I can, Chair, I don't think they are really requests from the detainees themselves as opposed to complaints. I genuinely do believe it's because it's the busiest suite. There are 36 cells, as you can see, and they are the busiest suite out of the others. I think it really is a case of that. I don't think there's any other explanation unless I'm missing something.
Okay, Alan? Yep. Page 73, issues reported. Health and safety issues identified, 15. Current custody visitors, 16, 17, 18. Meetings, 19, 20, 21. Developments during 18, 19, 22. Electronic visiting reporting, 23. Recruitment, 24, 25. National awards, 26. Independent Custody Visiting Association, 27. Regional collaboration, 28. And equality monitoring, 31. Positive feedback, 32. And the conclusion. Now, moving over to the appendix. Any questions at all on Ivan? Sorry, Ivan.
Thank you, Chair, and congratulations on the report. It's a very, very good read.
It's a strong report. Yep.
I looked down the induction training timetable and compared that to the expanded reasons why people had logged a complaint. And probably because of my background, was a bit surprised that there was no reference there to anybody suffering from Asperger's syndrome, or as it used to be called, autism, which can come across in quite a violent reaction. So I'd just like to be, it's really only an inquiry question, Chair, in the sense that I'd like to know if people with that condition are beginning to figure in any of the stats.
I look to you, Angela. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. The answer quite simply is yes. What you've got before you on Appendix A is the induction training, and it really covers a lot of induction that we have to do for new custody visitors. Now, we also, throughout the year, do advanced training. Autism has featured in advanced training for many years. It's a separate training session. This programme is for new people coming into the scheme. The autism training is for everyone. We hold that regularly. Can I say we also do dementia training for custody visitors? They all become dementia friends because you just never know who you're going to meet in a custody suite to broaden their expertise. But thank you for the question, and I can confirm we do deliver that on an annual basis.
Okay. And yet, Deborah.
Thank you, Chair. Really good report, really interesting as well to read. Just one point really on the list of issues raised. Some of them are quite immediate that need immediate action. Just, example, the kitchen, both ovens need cleaning. That was on the 19th of May 2018, and it's not reported that it's been cleaned until the 2nd of July. So I'm just wondering how responsive, because some of them need immediate action.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, a lot of the issues that are raised obviously relate to the individual detainee in the cell at the time, and a blanket and a cup of tea, and they can be dealt with. The issues that relate to cleaning issues and perhaps structural issues that we identify, they are raised with the force immediately. And sometimes it takes a while to get a response. Generally speaking, I have to say they're usually very prompt, but just once in a while it's taken. I mean, it might be that the oven was cleaned quite quickly, but we don't get the response till much later. Okay, thank you.
No, it's not. Pass straight on to Angela with your permission, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so the report before you is on the police handling of complaints. And can I just stress, this is for Q3, which is to the 31st of December. At the time that this report was written, this meeting was going to take place in May, and we've just had the end of year. So I'm sorry it's not included in this report. However, we'll work on what we've got. Just to reiterate from the report, the Professional Standards Department of Leicestershire Police are the people who are the appropriate authority to deal with all complaints received from the public against police officers and police staff. The only complaints they don't deal with are complaints against the Chief Constable, and they come to the Police and Crime Commissioner, who is the appropriate body for those. But every other complaint gets dealt with by PSD, as we call it. It's a rigorous inspection process. Complaints is highly regulated and rigorously inspected. And as you'll see there, Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary and the Independent Office of Police Conduct look at this quite frequently. So if I can just take you to paragraph 5, where there is some data in there about the different stages of complaints: finalising, recording, resolving. Going over the page, paragraph 6, there is a chart there giving you an idea of year on year for Q3. We have seen a decrease in the number of complaints, as mentioned in the report. I've spoken to our head of PSD and other officers. It's nationally recognised as well, so we don't really know why, but it is a national trend at the moment. Service recovery, and can I say the force do operate a service recovery approach. These are for very low level complaints, but sometimes if somebody just wants an update on something, it's quicker to just get on the phone, tell them, and give them the answer that they want. So that's been in place. And can I say that where service recovery is put into place, there's no need to or requirement to record those complaints. However, Leicestershire Police do keep a separate record of those, which I think is an admirable thing to do because it gives them trends that they don't lose sight of. So it is still recorded, but it just doesn't officially show in the IOPC data that they produce. Moving on to probably an interesting part is the top 5 allegations. Probably the ones that you may expect. Again, these are shared across forces nationally and within our most similar group of forces. They're all very similar. I listed para 14, other neglect or failure of duty, 130, and the categorisations of those are listed in that paragraph. A number of complaints, can I say, are locally resolved. These are the ones that aren't dealt with through service recovery. They don't go on to full investigation, but they are locally resolved, and they would never end up in a misconduct hearing for an officer. So the force do deal with a number of locally resolved, and usually to the satisfaction of the complainant, as well as the officer who's complained against, and they can be put to bed reasonably quickly. Timeliness is listed there at paragraph 20, and it gives you comparisons on the previous year, and ethnicity data is also listed. That's the complaints section, which we may come back to. If I can just mention super complaints, because I was asked to cover that within this report. I'm sure you will have heard about super complaints through the media. The super complaint system came into operation in November 2018, and it was a bit of a process to get there. You'll see that there are a number of designated bodies who can make or raise a super complaint, and they had to go through a whole set of criteria as to why they should be given that accreditation. So 27 applications were put into the Home Office, 16 were identified as being designated bodies, and I have listed those at para 25. Can I say that list doesn't mean to say it won't ever change. The Home Office will look at it again in 3 years' time, and if in the meantime any of those designated bodies don't meet that criteria, they would be removed from the list. So when a super complaint is raised, it goes to Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Service, and representatives from there and the College of Policing and the Independent Office of Police Conduct will decide what to do with a super complaint. And there are a number of outcomes which I have listed at paragraph 25. To date, only one complaint has been raised. Leicestershire are named, as is every force, and it's on behalf of Liberty and Southall Black Sisters, and you can see there it's for the Home Office sharing of data for the purpose of immigration enforcement and an entrenched culture of prioritised immigration control over public safety. I haven't taken much time in the report to fill that out, but there is a link there should you wish to look in more detail at that complaint. Finally, I would like to emphasise the Commissioner has a duty to ensure that there's an efficient and effective approach to how the force deal with complaints. He has a statutory duty to do that, and there are a number of ways that we exercise that function. So the Commissioner himself receives regular reports on complaints data and processing, which he receives to his Strategic Assurance Board. He does raise certain matters with the Chief Constable in his weekly one-to-one. Occasionally we will get someone write to us who really isn't happy, and not everybody is happy all the time, of course. And there might be something that the Commissioner feels he does need to raise with the Chief to look into a little bit further. And as already mentioned earlier, we have an Ethics, Complaints and Integrity Committee. There are 7 people who are recruited from the local community, and once a quarter they will come in, they will choose random numbers from a long list of complaints, and they will turn up and be given a whole load of files which they will work their way through and make comment on. They will also, can I say, look at a register which is our non-referral register. This register is for those cases where the force have decided not to refer the matter to the IOPC, and they have to put rationale down, and the independent people will look at that and give an opinion whether or not they think that rationale was appropriate or not. So the Commissioner has a number of ways in which he does seek assurance, and can I say I personally attend quarterly meetings with the IOPC and the head of PSD, and we go through all the performance for the previous quarter. They're very lively meetings. We have quite fiery discussions sometimes, but they really are interesting, and I think there's an excellent relationship there. And could I just add to good news, I said this was quarter 3. In paragraph 33 there, the first bullet point says 97% are recorded within 10 working days. That's actually gone up to 98% at the end of the year, and that puts Leicestershire Police in the first place, jointly I think with Avon and Somerset, for the whole country. I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Right. Well, that's finished off on a strong point. We'll go through each section again as it comes along. To me, there's not a lot to ask. It's a good report, but even so, some people may want clarification. Leicestershire Police performance, paragraph 3. Going through to public complaints made to Leicestershire Police, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Top 5 category of allegations, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Allegations finalised, 17, 18, 19, 20, and I can't get my words out at the moment. Ethnicity, can't say it. Anyway, paragraphs 21 and 22. Super complaints 23. Designated bodies 24, 25, 26. Handling of super complaints 27, 28, 29. Super complaints Leicestershire Police 30. And the conclusion, which is all confirmation of good news. So no questions at all. I'll move the recommendation to note the report. All in favour? Okay, thank you very much, members. Any other items? There's no items really but just want to remind you that the next meeting is Monday 22nd of July at the City Hall for county members. There's no easy way to park, I'm afraid. It's as simple as that. And I've tried everything, including working through Lord Willibrord to get me a place at the back, and I can't do it, but I did try. So you'll have to pay somewhere. Members.
Just make sure new members have got these dates in their diaries.
Yeah, Ewan's just rightly pointed out if new members could put in their diaries those 3 dates, that would be great. I apologise to you all, by the way. I forgot to go around the table for introductions. What we'll do is we'll leave that till next time. But I think there's one thing I should explain, especially to the members who are on the panel before the May elections. If you remember, I was representing Leicestershire County Council before May the 2nd, and since May the 2nd I now represent Melton Borough Council, and Ivan represents Leicestershire County Council. So I think that should be made clear to everyone. And I'd like to think it's all your wish that we write a letter to all the retiring members from May the 2nd, saying thank you for their services. Trevor, for instance, and Manjula, they were with us for the whole of the, since 2012, and their experience will be missed. But there's lots of experience been missed as well. So at that, wish you all a safe trip home, and thank you very much. And the meeting finishes at about 24 minutes past 4, 6 minutes ahead of my time. Thank you.